And welcome back to another edition of the On the Board Sports Podcast. I am your host, Will Cherucci, aka Will C, coming to you from Long Island, New York, Nassau County. And this is a very special episode. We talk about the NBA, Sean and I, but Sean isn't here with us, but we have two very special guests. And one half of this dynamic duo is from Long Island, New York. He is east of me. And the other half of this duo is from Nashville, Tennessee. But let's talk about their podcast first. They are the Fourth Man Podcast. They basically talk about the big three, and they're basically the fourth man out of all of this. If you haven't listened to their episodes, I suggest you do. They just had on Michael Cooper. I got to tell you, great episode listening to that. And I'm talking with the one and only William Hanley and the one and only Anthony Sigismund.
Ooh, killed it.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate this. How are you guys making out on this Tuesday?
I'm doing fantastic. It's just a fact that, the best podcasts come from Long Island. So, from the Fourth Man Podcast to On the Board Sports, you just get the best, whatever it is about this region. So I'm excited to be on, and, I'm sure Anthony will tell you that as well. So we're absolutely psyched.
Yeah, 100%. Appreciate you having us on and ready to talk a little basketball. And I will say that I feel like podcasts do pretty well down south too, but I understand where you're coming from. This is a very Long Island heavy episode, I think.
Hey, listen, you have some New York roots too, if I'm not mistaken. We were talking off there, and you have family from here in New York, albeit upstate, but we're all part of New York, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you dice it. So you are a New Yorker at heart. You're
Yes,
just
sir.
living in Nashville right now. So that's just awesome with the capital A, the quote, the great Dick Vitale. But let's talk some basketball. Better yet, let's talk about how you guys started up the Fourth Man Podcast. I don't know who to start off with here, because you guys have been really killing it thus far, talking about the big three. Guys, how did this all start off?
Well, it really started in the AAF, the Alliance of American Football. I was originally doing a podcast there when I lived in Atlanta for the Atlanta Legends. And my goal really was, I came from a smaller town, and when I went to college, and I was really about, let's expose people that don't get a lot of name recognition. And I'm the same way with professional sports and niche leagues. So as the AAF was kind of going through their troubles, I was already thinking on the side, I want to do a Big Three podcast. I was already writing about them during season 2 and doing my own blog, and thought, well, I guess I'll put all my eggs into this basket after the AAF went debunked. So did a couple episodes and found Big Three News, which is my co-host Will there. At the time, he was just a guest. He was a little reluctant to put in the time or to be there every single week. Eventually, I got him to be my co-host. And, for the past 2 years, it's really been a grind, and most of it's been an off season, really.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, just sort of, echo those sentiments. I mean, Anthony really is the heart and soul of this thing. Like, I joke around that the podcast is from Long Island, but the podcast is really from, wherever Anthony happens to be located, whether that's Georgia or Spain for a brief period of time, and back to Nashville. People ask me, they're like, what is your role on the podcast? And I always tell people, I'm like, if you ever seen Conan, like, I'm Andy Richter, I'm just there, and Anthony is absolutely, Conan, it's his show. But, he's right. One of the main things I was really excited about joining Anthony on this process is just, all the different opportunities. I'm sure through your own experience, having a podcast really, it legitimizes you in a way, right? And so I started out with Big Three News, which was at the time was just on, Twitter and Instagram. And, having an account was cool, but I was looking for a way to more, connect with people and just sort of get more content out there and connect with people on a more deeper level. And, along came the Fourth Man Podcast. So really it was a lot of good timing. And, then the timing was bad in a way, because then COVID happened and there was no Big Three leagues. So like Anthony said, we've really been in off-season mode, for going on the better part of 2 years, but things are finally starting to pick up. I mean, about the last 2 or 3 episodes, we've really had things to dissect and talk about, and roster moves. And like you said, we had Michael Cooper on, which was an absolutely crazy guest. I still am sort of digesting that myself, that we were able to get him. So I'm really excited about what the future of this thing's going to look like. And in a lot of ways, we're really just getting started.
Well, the future of the Big Three, they're going to be starting up the season probably rather relatively soon. I know last year they canceled everything. It was supposed to be a big summer for them after the hype and the hoopla from the last summer in 2019 with everything going on with them. Guys, just tell me about what's going to happen here for this season that's coming up. Do you see like any sort of, big things coming up here for the Big Three in that regard?
Yeah, 100%. I think that where we left off was 2020 in January when Ice Cube dropped big news that he was going to have a lot of rule changes, lower the age limit. I think the biggest one was probably the bring the fire rule, being able to challenge foul calls and dispute them by going one-on-one at the guy who fouled you. So I think that's what we were looking forward to the most. And then when everything got canceled, it's kind of like, well, I guess it's just a wait and see. The Big Three has a lot of things going on outside of that. They were trying to go international. They want to do a reality show, which I'm sure the logistics got a little messed up from COVID too. But I think the biggest thing is it looks like they're going to have a bubble scenario. It looks like they're trying to narrow down what state they're going to be in. And I think from the most part, the majority of guys who were originally in the league, it looks like they're returning. So I think all around it's just an exciting time because there's been a year gap. I think they're really trying to close that gap and remind everybody what a fun product this is.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I agree with Anthony. I think, we talk about it a lot on the podcast, but this summer is going to be a big one, right? In a lot of ways, we're almost hitting the reset button because, you're not too sure who's going to be back and who's not. I mean, one of the more recent developments was that Gilbert Arenas, who was sort of the face of one of the team's enemies, he's decided that he's going to transition to a coaching role, and he offered the team basically and the roster construction and all the responsibilities of making the team to Nick Young. Who was the other one too? Zach Randolph is going to be joining Trilogy. He announced that last year, but we never really got the chance to see him. So it's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be a big change, including the rule change from season 3 to season 4. I think it's going to be, a completely just a completely different scenario in a lot of ways, a very different league. But, it's been a very natural and very fun evolution, especially from season 1, if you go back and look. So, we're very excited. We think the future of this league is bright.
Guys, I got to ask you this because of everything going on. We talked about COVID. We talked about the teams. What are some of the rule changes that are going to be coming in to this Big Three into this league right now for the whole grand scheme of things?
So they're lowering the age limit from, I believe, 28 to 22. So that's something that's gone down for the past 3 years as they're trying to gradually grow this thing. The second one is having public open tryouts, allowing pretty much any athlete to come in and give it their shot, even professional athletes from the NFL, NHL, MLB, doesn't matter where they come from. It gives them a shot if they perform well to get an invite to the Big Three Combine, where then coaches, captains, GMs will be looking on and seeing who they want to pick. And then the final one is that bring the fire rule, being able to dispute a foul call and go one-on-one with a player. Now, we don't know the logistics of it. We don't know, can the person get fouled again? But I think everyone is extremely antsy for that rule, and especially in the Big Three, where it's just such like a grit and grind, tough guy mentality that you're already not getting a lot of foul calls. And so when calls are there's probably going to be plenty of calls disputed. There might not be a consistency with the referee. So that's something that I think we're really looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rule that we're also too really looking forward to, that I think is huge, and we've sort of seen this reflected in just the way that rosters are even just starting to be constructed, is lowering the age. If for people who aren't familiar with the Big Three, this thing really started out with where it was imperative that you had to have some sort of NBA experience. I think the age limit at the time was 30. You had to be 30 years old and some sort of NBA experience. There was only one guy in the league who didn't have NBA experience. That was David Hawkins, but that was it. He had to campaign to get in. But other than that, so that's a completely dramatic turnaround where it's, open tryouts and guys who are 22. So, I think really the Big Three is starting to shift into almost like a different avenue for guys who maybe want to get to the NBA or get back to the NBA, instead of maybe going overseas or playing in a G League or, like we saw Isaiah Thomas play for Team USA, maybe just, you hoop for a summer in the Big Three. And then if you're like a Joe Johnson or a Jeremy Pargo and Xavier Silas, you might get that NBA contract. You may get a shot to come back.
Absolutely. Speaking of some of those names, Joe Johnson, MVP winner of the Big Three. You're seeing a lot of things. Michael Cooper owns a Big Three team and the whole 9 yards. Okay, the whole 9 yards. Everything is pretty much a former pro basketball player owning this team and a bunch of pro NBA players basically going in there. Like you alluded to, Will, they're trying to basically find a way to get back into the NBA because you never know. You could get a practice contract. You could get a 10-day contract with everything going on. Have there been any other former NBA players that have been looking to play that have basically said, hey, you know what? This is going to be my time to shine here. I'm looking to come back into it. Obviously, Joe Johnson, he's done it doing this Big Three. But in your guys' minds, who do you see making that jump from being a retired NBA player or just trying to find some work that could really work out in the Big Three?
This is probably the biggest question that we've been mulling over for the past 2 years of being in the offseason. And I think we've got enough speculation. I think we've investigated a good amount of clues or cues to narrow that list down to about 5 guys. All right. So we mentioned Nick Young. He seems like 99 out of 100% we'll probably see him in the league. The other 4 guys, things have gotten a little bit more interesting with a couple, but Michael Beasley, we've heard his name from multiple captains within the league, and the Big Three just sent him a DM. Lance Stevenson.
Yeah, they formally invited Michael Beasley via Instagram DMs. They slid in there. So got Michael Beasley, who it seems like teams are fighting over him. Lance Stevenson, who just from our own research on social media, it looks like he has a lot of ties to Indiana, 1. But 2, the guys who live in Indiana and happen to play for Aliens, guys like Andre Owens and Robert Baden. So we think that could be a potential match. We speculated Jamal Crawford, Dwayne Wade, which they kind of seem like a little bit further out, a little bit tougher to get. And, I think Zebo is one that we speculated for a while too, that just so happened to actually join the league. So that was like 5 or 6 right there. I mean, obviously we've looked at other guys. Isaiah Thomas is someone that we've talked about. Deion Waiters and J.R. Smith were real prominent names, especially after the finals and not seeing a lot of minutes, but just being on that team. Will can probably name even a couple more there. I mean, this is probably our biggest question of the offseason is who's going to join after such a crazy Big Three season 3. Yeah, I think so. It's funny, right? So that really is like the biggest thing that we talk about, and we have like a name for it. We call it like speculation season, right? Like let's speculate who's going to come into the league. Let's get let's start stirring the pot a little bit. And I think honestly, Michael Beasley was a big one. If I'm being honest with you, I think just from everything that we've seen, and we've talked to guys like we had DeMar Johnson on, who's really like the head and one of the GMs of Three's Company, who's Michael Cooper's team. And I know they really want him. They want him bad. And Swaggy P said that they want him too. And, the guys at Ghost Brawlers have said that they want him as well on their team. So I think if he wants an opportunity, for sure. Jamal Crawford, we heard Jamal Crawford, basically Jamal really, at the time we were told that Jamal Crawford wouldn't play in the Big Three because his last NBA game, he dropped 50, or whatever that stat line was. And he said that he wanted to go out like that. And then he joins the Nets in the bubbles, plays for a few minutes, gets hurt, and then that's it. That's the last we see of him. So now Anthony and I are asking the question, okay, is Jamal Crawford still have that mentality, or is he like, all right, like, I don't want to go out like that? So I think Jamal Crawford's another one. Dwayne Wade, Dwayne Wade is such an interesting name, right? He really was like he was really such like a Hail Mary almost type of like guy. But honestly, if I gotta be honest with you, we've talked to guys like Robert Height, guys like, people who have worked in the Big Three, and they all say they're like, it's not as unlikely as you would think. And, he even gave the Big Three a shout out last year on Twitter. And he was like, it's so fun watching that league. And So, and we heard too, we had Mo Charlo on the podcast, and he told us that Dwayne Wade was going to join the TBT if it hadn't been for the fact that they were in a bubble. So we don't know if his stance, I'm not going to play in a bubble stance, has changed since then, since we know the Big Three is going to be in a bubble. But, it shows you that Dwayne Wade still wants to play somewhere. So I think that's a legit possibility. And, it's always fun because all those guys that we named, they're going to be captains, right? Those are going to be guys who are going to be either captains or co-captains of the team. But it's going to be really fun, too, especially with the lower age limit, seeing the draft pool fill out. Maybe guys who – we maybe never heard of, maybe guys from mid-major schools who got overlooked. I know, not to tease anything, but, a gentleman like Mike Dahm, who Anthony had the opportunity to speak to, I believe, a little bit earlier today. And Mike Dahm, for people who are big into college, know that he was absolutely crazy at South Dakota State. So someone like him who never even got a chance at the NBA, but who a lot of people think were deserving, I think the Big Three would be a good opportunity for him to showcase his talents.
You look at everything going on right now in the Big Three in the NBA. Do you see maybe a player that's really rewarding of trying to make it back into the NBA again at that point, or even a G League contract?
You mean a guy from the Big Three?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say the first name that comes off the top of my head is Amari Stottemeyer. Now, obviously, I know he's in a coaching role, but when he was playing well last year, he won Defensive Player of the Year in the Big Three. He was getting workouts with multiple NBA teams, and that's kind of how Joe Johnson was operating as well. So, Amari was really good. Trying to think of some other guys that I feel like were really good. And Will, you can jump in whenever you want if you have someone in mind.
If I can piggyback off of that Amari statement, we know that Amari is with the Nets, and he's one of their player development guys. And, maybe I'm grasping at straws a little bit, but just seeing Amari play, and he won Finals MVP in Israel last season. So this was in between, the Big Three seasons. You look at the way Brooklyn's bigs have developed. The way that Jarrett Allen sort of took leaps and bounds, and now we see Nick Claxton. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if that's just because of going with Amari Stottemeyer in practice every day. Amari Stottemeyer, I truly believe just the way that he played, not only on the offensive end, but the defensive end, is an NBA caliber player, especially if you see some of, the bigs out there. So I think guys like Amari Stottemeyer for sure. Who else? I'm still going to, to this day say that I think a team could use Joe Johnson, as a starter, as a six man, maybe not, I don't know. But, absolutely just as like a scorer coming off the bench, or even like, a veteran at the end of a rotation. I think Joe Johnson could 100% play in the NBA. And, that's, it's tough to say, honestly, because I think the NBA is really starting to move away towards vets. We always saw that the end of the rotation and maybe the last couple guys on a team was like those Udonis Haslems, right? Those guys who are just going to be there and, hold it down and be in the locker room. And, now it's really, you start seeing now these two-way players and these guys. The NBA is really like, listen, we're going to move away from those guys, and we're going to pick up some young, undeveloped talent and hope that maybe, we find a diamond in the rough somewhere. So, I can't disagree with that philosophy. It's sort of just a change in the philosophies that we're seeing over time. But, the Big Three is full of guys like, I would say, Udonis Haslem, guys who, bring value and skills to an organization. If Udonis Haslem has been there forever, he's won championships, so he's sort of one of the outliers. But, I think there's plenty of guys in the Big Three who could absolutely play that Udonis Haslem role on any team in the NBA.
And I just want to say some honorable mentions that I was thinking about,
Right.
as you said, from your team, Bivouac, Will, that you really like. I think Josh Smith and Will Bynum were two of the best that we saw all year. And Perry Jones, who's still under 30 years old, still has a lot of bounce in his game. I'm not really sure what the concerns were with him in the NBA because he was a first-round pick. But Perry Jones
Royce White as well.
Keep an eye on. Royce White's another guy, which we know that he's kind of a little bit of a confliction with the NBA and some of the stances that he presented when he came in. But I think Royce White could easily get back into an NBA game and be a huge asset.
All right. So now I got to ask you guys this one. All right. And this is going to be my final Big Three question, and we'll move on to the NBA and how things are going in the NBA. The Big Three right now on social media has a great social media presence. They just recently ended their deal with FS1, and now they're on CBS Sports. How do you guys feel about basically them going from one TV carrier from Fox Sports going to CBS Sports at that point in time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they joined CBS in 2019, right? So we got to see sort of a little bit of them on CBS one season. And, if I'm being honest with you, I think CBS does a great job. You guys are Jets fans, right? I'm a Giants fan. So I'm really on Fox really most Sundays. And, I do like Fox. I think, Fox does a very good job. But I'd be honest, if I'm not a little jealous, you guys get to be on CBS, with Romo and guys like Ian Eagle. And, I just feel like they have great announcers. And, I don't even know what it is, but like the score bug and just the production value, I really do like the product that CBS puts out there. So, I'm really looking forward to what CBS has to offer. But, it's interesting that you asked that question, because one of the biggest things that happened, one of the biggest storylines heading into a pre-COVID season 4 was, Ice Cube was really trying to make his own channel, his own sports channel that was sort of, him, and I had a couple other investors, I think like LL Cool J and Serena Williams was another one, that they really wanted this black owned sports network. And that was going to be one of the premier provider of the big three. So I think, that ended up falling through. And I think it would have been really interesting to see the big three on that channel. But, I'm not going to get any complaints as it's on CBS. I think they do a phenomenal job. Jim Jackson and those guys follow them over from Fox to CBS. Michael Rappaport is still on the sidelines. So, I think overall, I think it's a great product.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's too much more to say about that. I think that CBS really has done a good job, and that's the big emphasis right there is the announcers. Not only you got Jim Jackson, him and Brian Custer are probably the main big three personalities when it comes to the bigger games, but even guys like Brendan Haywood and Avery Johnson that they've brought on. I mean, those are guys who have had long-standing NBA careers and some success in the NBA that they're bringing in for analysis. And I know that every player can't just shift into that role, but that's something that I really liked about CBS, and not saying that Fox Sports didn't provide a great platform. I just think CBS has a little bit more to offer, but that's the biggest thing. I think that what Will said about have Ice Cube having his own network, I don't think that's the last time we'll hear about him trying to do that with a few investors. So I think that's something that he's really trying to put a little bit of an emphasis on wherever he can, whether networks are being sold or he's able to get a group and bid for a certain network. But I think with the way things went last year in season 3, which, I expect the seasons to only get better, as well as season 3 went last year, I think we should have high expectations for season 4 on CBS too.
Guys, the big three, it's going to be great. This season's coming back. It's only going to grow. They have their investors there in place, but big three is what you guys talk about. What we talk about really is the NBA. And we don't get to talk about the big three that much, but we got to switch on from big three to NBA. I know you guys follow the NBA a lot. We got to talk about the New York teams right now, because nationally, the Brooklyn Nets are getting most of the attention because of the fact that they are a national thing. With my co-host would love that shirt, by the way. If he was with us right now, he would love that t-shirt. Big Nets fan. I'm a Laker fan. But to get back to New York basketball right now, with everything going on, they're national. They got KD, Kyrie, and James Harden. But it's New York, and New York is only going to be dominated by Knicks talk. And right now, the Knicks are playing hot. They're playing phenomenal, even though they're a game over 500, 18-17, Eastern Conference this week. I understand that. But they're still in the top 4. And think about this from 5 years ago. If you were to look at the bottom 4 teams, they were in any order, no particular order. They were the Sixers, the Nets, the Bucks, and the Knicks. Flash forward 5 years from now, from then to now, they are the top 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. That is unbelievable to even think about. But let's talk about the New York basketball teams right now. We'll start off with the Knicks. They're the hottest team right now. We'll start off here with Anthony talking about it. How do you feel about the Knicks right now?
Ooh, the Knicks. I mean, I like their team. I think I'm a big fan of Julius Randle, and not so much from his time with the Lakers, but more so his 1 year he spent with the New Orleans Pelicans and playing alongside Anthony Davis. Really liked him there. But I mean, I think in a way they're finally building the right way. You know, we've had most of the people that we have on, I feel like, are generally from the North, and a couple of them are Knicks fans. And the biggest thing for them, I felt like going into this season, was don't trade for a big star. Like, let's build this thing through the draft a little bit more. We'll add a few pieces like Julius Randle and try to only progress where they're at from a professional standpoint, and let's run it that way. And I think that's exactly what they've done, and they're doing a really good job of that. Like, I think they're bringing along RJ Barrett really nicely. I think they nailed the draft with Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin. And even with some of the other moves that they made in free agency, like bringing back Elfrid Payton or a couple of the other guys on 1 year deals, I was like, is that really like the best move for the Knicks? And sure enough, like they're in the top 4. They're climbing back into the conversation of someone who could compete in the East. Julius Randle's an all-star. I mean, you setting up the table of it, like the 4 worst teams being the 4 best teams now is still wild to me. So I'm a fan of what the Knicks are doing.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, I gotta agree. I mean, listen, for the people who aren't watching the video, I have my Nets shirt on now, so I wear my allegiance on my sleeve, but I'm not one of those people who wishes harm on the Knicks, or like I'm a Giants fan. I don't wish harm on the Jets. I'm all about the rivalry, right? And basketball, and besides hockey and basketball, and I'm not really a big hockey fan, so I do apologize, but the Knicks and the Nets are the only 2 New York teams in any sport that really have a direct effect on each other. Like the Giants and the Jets could go undefeated, and both be cool. Same thing with the Yankees and the Mets. They both could have stellar seasons, and really, besides maybe a subway season, they're really not going to have any direct effect on each other. But the Knicks and the Nets, they're in the same division, they're in the same conference. So, if you have 2 good teams in New York, I think that's fantastic, especially for everything that this city has been through, from COVID. Just the fact that you have this rivalry sort of reborn. I mean, I saw all the Nets fans outside of MSG chanting, like, Brooklyn sucks, when they were made the 4th seed or whatever. And, I love it. I think it's awesome. And, I hope that the seeding stands off so that we get a playoff series, either round 1 or round 2. But I think it's great. And I agree with Anthony. I think for the first time in a while, the Knicks are finally building the right way. I think the thing that they did, and I don't know whose it was, but it was so clear and obvious that they were putting all of their money on getting Kyrie, KD, and Zion. And I just thought that was just the silliest thing in the world to do. And then when it didn't happen, they were sort of just, left with their pants down behind their ankles. And you were just kind of like, what are they doing? And then they tried to backtrack the whole thing. I think hiring Thibodeau was the best thing they could have done. I think Thibodeau is a fantastic coach. Is he the coach to win them a championship? I don't know, but he brings some stability. He brings, he's somebody that he knows what he's doing. You don't have to worry about him every day, or, his experimentations and his lineups and things like that. And, they're finally winning, and winning cures a lot, to be honest with you, in the media. And now all of a sudden there's no drama. James Dolan hasn't been in the headlines for a while,
right.
It's because they're winning, and because people are happy. So, I'm excited to see what happens with the Knicks. I think, you're always going to hear talk of the media, and I don't know why the media does this, but, like the Knicks need to go out and trade for a star, because I guess they've always done that at some point. But, I'd keep on rolling. And, I always said, because growing up on Long Island, right, I'm sure everybody, same thing with you, Will, everybody's Knicks fans out here. I'm like the one Nets fan and a sea of Knicks fans. And I always said to them, I was like, listen, I said, if I'm being honest with you guys, I said, you guys, I feel like, are 2 years behind us. And, and honestly, this Knicks team reminds me a lot of the 2019 Nets team, with D'Lo and all them. And, D'Lo sort of rose to stardom. Same thing the way Julius Randle is rising to stardom. And, Quickly's great. Toppin, I think, is definitely a piece to develop. Frank, I love Frank. I'm Frank high forever. I want to see Frank do good. RJ Barrett's playing great. So I think it's just about making good, smart moves, and, always, keep that max contract open. And then if a Bradley Beal, or if, I don't know, somebody, things change a lot. There could be somebody who seems like they're not leaving, and then within 6 months, like, look at what happened to Harden, right? Harden, nobody ever thought Harden was leaving Houston. And then all of a sudden, 4 weeks later, Harden's out. So, you always want to make sure you keep all your options open if you're the Knicks, but I'm excited to see where they're heading. And, as a Nets fan, I always welcome the rivalry because I think at the end of the day, it helps both teams and it helps, it's just fun to be a part of.
I got to tell you, man, the hockey part, it kind of disappointed me on that because the fact that you got the Rangers and the Islanders playing in the same division and the history in the 80s, the 90s, even up to now, with the Islanders winning their 4 straight Stanley Cups, almost at the expense of the Rangers, just about. And you let them out like that. No, I'm kidding around about that.
I'll be 100% honest with you, and I'll be the first. That is such a world that I am so ignorant to.
You would love it.
I knew the Islanders won. Like I think there was 4 in a row, right? They won 4 in a row in the 80s.
Last pro sports team to win 4 straight championships
in
North America.
That I had no idea.
Now you know.
Now I know. Wow, that's
not
crazy.
It's not the Bulls. It's not the Lakers. Right. It's not the Yankees. It's not the Patriots. It's the New York Islanders that won 4 straight championships. The last team to do it. So that's your little fact of knowledge that you just learned.
There we go.
No, all due respect though, it's all right. It happens. Hockey. Nobody really talks about hockey that much, really, in the media anyway. So that's a shame on them because it's a great sport. But anyway, to go back to what we were talking about, let's talk about we talked about the Knicks. Let's talk about the Nets. They went on a crazy winning streak. I think they won 7 games in a row, including a 4-game, 5-game road trip win. In that sense, where they went up against the Lakers, the Clippers, they beat the Suns in dramatic fashion, and the Spurs, even though the Spurs came back in regulation, and then that's won in an overtime convincingly. We'll start off with Will here on the Nets. How did you feel about the James Harden deal going through, A, and B, even though they're big 3, there's no guarantee that they're going to win the NBA Finals. How do you feel about this team going forward?
I mean, I'll tell you what, there absolutely is no guarantee, but I think one of the biggest things is that, how I felt about the Harden trade, in the moment, I was like, I can't believe that we did it, and then I was, I think it took me a little bit to process it because as Anthony will tell you, I wasn't the biggest Harden fan in the world, but, I gotta be honest with you. I feel like the Harden that we got is not any resemblance of the Harden that we got in Houston. And I mean that in the best way possible. He has just, my respect for James Harden has grown astronomically in this last month or so, just because of the way that he's been able to mold his game and he's really fit like a glove in this offense. I'll tell you what, that 2019 team, we already brought it up, with D'Lo and Karis LeVert and Jared Allen, that team is always going to have a special place in my heart. But, that team was cute, right? That team was the cute little puppy that everybody loves to post on Instagram and play with, But the difference between a puppy and, nobody's posting about the bulldog or the Rottweiler that they have, because those dogs are scary, right? But you want a dog that's going to, kick ass, you get the bulldog and the Rottweiler. But you want a dog that everybody likes, nobody's afraid of, they get the cute puppy. Everybody loves that, right? And so listen, I love that 2019 team, but they were cute. I don't know what the ceiling to that team was. Is D'Lo leading us to a championship? I don't know. Only one team can win it at the end of the day. But if you have the chance to get Kyrie, KD, and then Harden, I think you got to do it, 10 times out of 10. And just, it's all about just health and cohesiveness and putting their egos aside. And, I'll be 100% honest. I'm not going to be one of those people that said, I never had any doubts they're going to be fine. Of course I had doubts, because I watched Kyrie in Boston and I watched KD in Golden State and I watched Harden in Houston. I said, how is this going to work? And credit to, those 3 gentlemen and the organization as a whole, besides a couple of little bumps in the road, which, call them what they will, but, it's worked out pretty well. And, I'm not attuned to the fact that could change at any moment, knowing these guys. So, I truly do think that they're title contenders. I think that, you still have to go out and get a big, somebody to take care of Embiid in the playoffs. But, listen, man, at the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to my team versus your team. I think it's going to be Nets Lakers And, if it's not, then I think the Nets are going to have to, make some serious changes, because I think all three guys are really not only do they want a championship, but they're expecting a championship out of this. So if that doesn't happen, then I'm going to be very interested to see what happens. But, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, we're going to be hanging up, probably 4 jerseys in the rafters, and that's Durant's, Kyrie's, Harden's, and Joe Harris's. And, you
Joe
can't say
Harris.
that. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
That's very bold right there.
Absolutely.
That is
I could
bold.
I could go on for hours about Joe Harris. They
Okay.
found that man in the scrap pile. Cleveland cuts him after his injury. They trade him to Orlando. Orlando cuts him immediately. Cleveland gave up a second-round pick just to move Joe Harris, to cut him. They signed him to the G League, and now the man is one of the best shooters of this generation. 110%. I would retire Joe Harris's number.
That is very bold right there,
Mm-hmm.
Will. Anthony, I got to ask you this one right now, bud, okay? Your co-host, he talked about the big three and how he feels. Talk about Steve Nash and his coaching situation right now with how he is, because it's his first year, and we've seen plenty of first-year head coaches looking like they're hot shit, and then all of a sudden they got to deal with this mess that's going on with this whole COVID situation. Talk to us about how Steve Nash has basically kind of found himself here in that sense, just trying to make it through this season and with this roster that's in place.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think I was really excited to see Steve Nash in a coaching role. It was a little unexpected, a little taken aback, but I'm like, wow, this is interesting. He was such a good player, floor general on the court. Let's see what he can do in more of a coaching role here. And, I think Will and I, if we aren't talking big three, we're talking about the Nets. Just with my love for James Harden, that's the guy I've been following since OKC, and him joining the team that Will likes. Like, this is pretty much all we talk about. And I think the best thing that Nash brings is just relatable experience. He's not far from their age. He played against all of them, I think. And he's just a guy that can relate. And I feel like it's not just him telling them all these things to do, because he understands, he knows where they need to be and what place they need to be in order to succeed. So it's more of just like an understanding of what you're doing and filling in Steve Nash on some of those, plays or whatever they're going to do within a game. It's just making sure that everyone's filled in on that. So I think Will and I have talked about, originally, it seemed like his biggest issue was trying to figure out like how many minutes each guy needed and how often to play with certain lineups. And I would say for me personally, I feel like he's come a long way from where he was at the beginning of the year, and been able to find the right balance and work with the Harden and Kyrie duo, or just Harden on a nightly basis, or just KD and Kyrie. He's hasn't really got a lot of the big three. It's more been just like one or two of them. So I think he's done a good job like meshing those lineups well, understanding what's working. And I would say the biggest thing is I'm glad that Bruce Brown wasn't out of the lineup as long as he was at the beginning of the year. It felt like he played really well. Then he sat him for a while, and now he looks like almost one of the 5 most key players on this Nets team for them to really go the distance. So I think Steve Nash has done a good job. I think he's, in my opinion, probably the best guy suited for this, despite being a first-year head coach. And I say that because he's just able to relate with them so well from a personal standpoint and a player standpoint.
Very interesting right there. Hey, speaking of surprises, has there been an NBA team that has been surprising to you this season? We'll start off with Will.
Ooh, surprising in a good way or surprising in a bad way?
We can go both.
I'd say, that's a good question. Well, let me just say this, because I don't know why, but my mind immediately goes negative. But I'm really surprised at the Miami Heat. I understand that they've had injury troubles and stuff, but Eric Spoelstra is a fantastic coach, but it seems like they really lucked out with guys like Nunn and Hero, and they've really sort of, I shouldn't say taken a step back, but they really just haven't taken that next step that everyone expected to them to, especially with Hero, dropping 40 or whatever it was in the bubble in the playoffs. Normally when a player does that, you expect big things to come next in their next season. So, I don't know what it is, but I think losing Derrick Jones Jr. was huge for them. Losing Jamison Crowder, another one, was huge for them. And I just really I haven't been impressed with them. I don't know when the last time you saw a team make it to the NBA Finals and then, be struggling to stay afloat in the playoff race. And, I guess we've seen that before, but normally it's after a roster overhaul. These are the same guys. So, I don't know. I'm just mostly surprised by the Miami Heat. I thought they were here to stay. I know we talked about them being in the running for Giannis because everyone was like, they're the perfect spot for this second max slot player. But now, I don't know what Miami does, but they're in a very odd place that I didn't expect them to be in.
Anthony?
Yeah, I have a couple here, but I think the team that's surprising me the most, and in a positive and negative way, is the Wizards, because they had such high expectations coming in, adding Westbrook. It looked like they were at least going to be fighting for the 7-8 game or whatever the 7 through 10 seeding, I guess, like small playoff looked like. But it looked like they were going to be a lock for that. They get off to a horrible start. There's instantly, it seems like rumors have been surrounding Bradley Beal for like the past 3 years, but those continues to rise and rise. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, we found our groove and we've gotten a little hot. And all of a sudden they make a little bit of a run. Like they've won like 6 out of their last 7 or 7 of their last 8. They beat the Lakers within that. They beat a couple good teams within that. So I'm curious to see how they finish out the season and, what they do with the roster. Like, are they still in the trade market? Are they looking to sell one of their big stars? Or are they potentially buying somebody to make a stronger impact in the playoffs? Maybe get them to a second round and just make things look a little bit better for them to be able to hold on to Beal as long as they can. Because as much as he talks about his happiness in Washington, I think a part of him is, at least looking at these teams contending year in and year out and being like, man, I would really wish I was a part of that. And I think we saw that with James Harden, where he felt like the team wasn't ready to compete. And I think Bradley Beal is going to know what that looks like, just with his time playing for a bad team and playing through some of the highs as well. So I would say the Wizards are probably the one that I'm a little interested to see, where they are at the end of the year there.
My final question here for both of you guys is, with everything going on in the NBA, we've seen some coaching, I'm going to have to edit this one out. Some coaching changes, tongue twister right there. Coaching changes happen over the course of a couple of weeks. Minnesota fires their head coach after what happened against the Knicks, and they've been bad. And then the Hawks today, they fired their coach, in which, they kind of had some sort of winning feeling in the offseason, this past offseason. And right now they're 14-20. They're kind of out of it, but they could always find themselves back in that 7-10 playing spot as time goes on. They hired Nate McMillan today to be the head coach for the rest of the year, and then for the future here. Are you surprised by any of the coaching changes that had happened thus far this season?
Not really. I think that, especially with the player empowerment movement, when it came out as a report that Hawks players weren't necessarily happy with the coaching situation, and you have someone like Nate McMillan, who was a head coach last year, it makes a lot of sense, especially when the team isn't going the way you want it to. There's been rumors about John Collins being traded. It's a team that everyone's talking about being a top 5 seed in the East, and it doesn't even look like they'll crack the top 8. We'll see if they get into a play-in game, but it's just been turbulence for them. And I think the same thing for the Wolves. Now the Timberwolves have obviously had their fair share of issues with injuries. They added D'Lo, but he hasn't really been that healthy. Cat's been dealing with COVID and a wrist injury. And so it's interesting because I really feel like for Lloyd Pierce, he kind of got that Hugh Jackson role. And it's he was the guy who was supposed to get them through the bad parts of this come up. And then when year 3, year 4 comes and you got all the pieces in play, you're supposed to take them on this run. He just didn't deliver. And I think maybe the Hawks looked at it like that. I think their GM has been really good and just thought it just doesn't seem right. The players aren't really meshing with him, and he's just not leading them to where we want to be. So long story short, I do feel like it's not super surprising because of their struggles, especially from the Timberwolves part. Like they've been bad, like real bad. uh, so it's a little weird that they are doing it in season because you don't necessarily see that in the NBA all the time. But at the same time, I think at some point you just know that it's maybe time to move on and try to change directions a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, right? I think the Minnesota situation, the Atlanta situation have a lot of similarities, right? Number one being that like you have young superstars there in Minnesota. You have Cat, D'Lo, and Anthony Edwards is becoming a young star, and then in Atlanta you have really Trae Young, and both teams sort of had this all in approach. Like both teams sort of had the expectation, like, all right, like this is the year that we're finally going to start winning. I mean, Minnesota has not been good since really, since Jimmy Butler left, really, and that was one season, but other than that, they have not been good with Wiggins and Cat. So when you go out and you sort of, risk it all, like I don't even think the Timberwolves have their first round pick this year. I think it goes to Golden State. There might be some protection on that, but I'm not too sure. So, I think it's sort of like a desperation move. It's sort of almost like, all right, like this isn't working and we can't, and we already promised ourselves, or we went in with the expectation that this was the season that we were going to finally start, seeing, we're finally going to see the fruits of our labor a little bit. And neither team has seen that. I think Atlanta, I get a little bit more confused with, just because personally I like Lloyd Pierce as a coach. And I don't know basically he's coming out that Trae Young and them really didn't want him as a coach. And, I sit here and ask, like, what has Trae Young done to make that call? Just besides obviously Trae Young is very good and I think he will be good, but I don't know. I don't know what, you've seen guys like LeBron and Kyrie and KD change coaches. Is Trae Young on that level? I don't know. Like, you tell me that if Luka wanted Rick Carlisle fired, Rick Carlisle would be fired. I don't know. Rick Carlisle has a ring, sure, and he's been there forever, so I guess it's a bit of a different situation. But I don't know, the Atlanta Hawks one, but also too, like, that organization, they went all in. You brought in Bogdanovich, you brought in all of these free agents that you're like, all right, we're ready to like make a run around Trae Young, and it just hasn't worked out yet. So I think that's what you're seeing, as opposed to a team like, I saw it, and when they fired Lloyd Pierce, everyone was like, all right, well, what about Luke Walton? How does Luke Walton still have a job? And, I think Luke Walton's a very different situation. I don't think the expectation internally is that they're going to win anytime soon. I think right now it's just, they haven't really spent money on any free agents. They only really did retain Fox, and they have Halliburton and, Hield. But other than that, I don't know, man. I think it all has to do with what the expectations are. The Timberwolves and the Hawks put very high expectations on themselves, and neither one of them delivered. And I think that's, for an NBA coach, that's the easiest way to, get fired nowadays.
Yep. Hey, you hired to be fired at that point. And,
That's true.
both those guys, both those situations, with the roster that's there in place, they didn't meet expectation. And then that was it, But you guys delivered today. You guys delivered in the clutch. Make no mistake about that. You guys came through for the On the Board Sports Podcast. Anthony, Will, thank you again for coming on. Really appreciate this. My final question, and this is it here. How do the people follow the Fourth Man Podcast, and how can the people listen and watch you guys talk about the big three, the NBA, and anything else in between?
For sure. We're on Apple, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. You can also watch the show on YouTube at youtube.com/fourthmanpod. Socials are at Fourth Man Pod, 4TH Man Pod, and Big Three News. That's E. That's the E is a 3, not an actual E in the news part. And pretty much anything Big Three you want, you'll find on one of those pages, whether it's
For sure.
from an audio version, a video version, or just even a graphic or post, you'll find. So anything through there, and then trying to get a little bit more prominent on TikTok, but for me personally, I'm not having a lot of success. So TikTok, Fourth Man Pod on there as well. So those are all where you can find us.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I'll tell you what, and we do not, the good thing, what I like working about Anthony, and something I think we have in common, is we really don't have egos. We're very, we're willing to learn off of each other, and we go through this, and we're just really gracious, for the opportunities that we have, especially this one, having the opportunity to come on the board. That's a huge deal for us. But, I will say this, to toot our own horn, if you have any interest in the big three, we're your spot. The big three, obviously their own socials, and they have stuff going on, sometimes, but for daily stuff, for the news, for the rumors, for the discussion, for the breakdowns, you're looking at me and Anthony right now. We're the two guys that are really going to have you covered for this. And it's going to be a very exciting season with a lot of big names that are going to join. So, if you're interested, if you're on the fence, if you maybe checked it out for a game or two, we really implore you guys to come check it out. Come check us out. Come check out what we do. And we really think that you guys are going to like what you see.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure and it's been great. I can't wait to watch the big three this year. It's going to be fun. Basketball for me in the NBA, it's gotten stale, but to see the big three come out and become basically seeing all the old guys again from my childhood, basically playing again, even though they got a little gray in their beard and in their hair, it's still something to see. So that's awesome to see. And to see you two cover it, it's even better. So Anthony Siskiman and William Hanley, thank you so much for coming on to the On the Board Sports Podcast. I really appreciate this. And you guys keep on killing it with the work that you're doing out there, man. Really appreciate this time with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Absolutely.
You two keep killing it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. Thank you. And we got to collab again sometime soon.
For sure.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Awesome stuff, guys. Hey, Will, maybe I'll see you out in the island soon. Who knows?
100%, bro. You let me know. I'm there.
No doubt. Gentlemen, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you.
Appreciate you.